Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Sister Sister, a podcast for spiritual baddies. We are your hosts, Elena Maya, and today's episode is gonna kind of deviate from our current track that we've been on. Elle, do you want to tell us more?
So today's episode is going to be kind of an update to the expanded version of season 4, where we dived into topics regarding Christian nationalism and things of that sort. So we're going to be kind of talking about current events as well as Christian nationalism and what it's looking like currently, and kind of just giving you the update. Obviously, this episode is coming out a lot later, and this is what is relevant currently in a month from now, because I think that's when this will be coming out, is about a month from when we're recording. Some of these things you guys will be like, that happened so long ago. But in reality, it just happened within like the last week or two. And so that is why you may be like, why are you talking about that? And it's like, well, it is currently relevant, and it does also just kind of really wrap into that portion of the last season where we had first started into the Trump administration, and now we're getting closer to the end of the first year, and we kind of need to update on what Christian nationalism is looking like in our current political climate.
And before we continue further, we wanted to give a brief disclaimer that this episode covers sensitive and potentially triggering topics, including political violence, immigration enforcement, and healthcare access. Our goal is still to provide information and context, not to endorse or promote any particular point of view, although we will do our best to be as neutral as possible, even if we have certain opinions. As always, we encourage you to think critically, do your own research, and take care of yourself if anything feels heavy while listening to this episode.
It's going to be a deep one, guys, so just prepare yourselves.
And if you might have guessed it, we are going to be covering the recent passing of Charlie Kirk. He was not necessarily a political, well, he was like a political figure, but he was not like a politician, so to speak. He was more of like, I
I
don't even
would
know how to
say that
describe him.
I would say the best way to describe it is kind of like any of those people that were debating on Jubilee last election cycle, and he was one of them, would be a political influencer, which is like such a strange way to define it, but I think that probably defines the best.
Didn't think we would have political influencers, but here
Kind
we
of
are.
sums it up the best, kind of like one person I remember from that episode that was debating with him was Dean. I've seen him on my For You page on and off ever since the last election. I would say he's kind of the same thing, just on the other side. So you definitely have these kind of political figures that are not politicians, but influencers at this point. That's what they are. Let's just be honest. They're influencers. There's no other way to describe it.
Yeah. So I will say that with this, obviously, we don't want anyone to be dramatically shot on camera the way he was, but I think the reason why a lot of people were upset about it, and for different reasons, some people were upset because, like, why would it happen, like, in the middle of broad daylight in front of a large crowd of people? And others were feeling like it was a political attack from the left. Needless to say, we will get into all the theories in a second. I do think that the reason why his death is so prominent either way is because it was a successful, quote unquote, attempt at a political figure. And earlier this summer, President Trump was also shot as well, but obviously he did not pass. He just got injured. So that being said, there was a little bit of a political debate around him and his passing. Elle, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, so growing up in a conservative town, I heard a lot from both sides of the spectrum, obviously. And for me, I feel like one of the biggest debates that should come out of this is about gun laws, but we'll get into that as well here in a few moments. But I think that the thing that a lot of people weren't understanding and the reason why it wasn't that people lack empathy. I really don't think people lack empathy or people want someone to pass because of violence. I don't think that's it at all. However, I think that the issue that a lot of people had is the fact that people do not care whenever it is a mass casualty event at a gay bar or at a school or whenever it is Indigenous women that go missing. And because of the context of him being a prominent figure in the political sphere and a white man, and then everyone wanted to have thoughts and prayers sent, I think it was triggering for a lot of people, if I'm being completely honest. I think that's probably the best way to describe it from a psychological standpoint is that you look at it from your point of view of someone who is watching people lose their lives every day because of gun violence and no one's speaking up about it. And then someone who is a white man passes and it seems like everyone was talking about it. And whether no matter how you feel about it, no one deserves to lose their life. But I think it opened up a much broader conversation about why are we not paying attention to all of these mass casualty events, but everyone wants to pay attention to this one single casualty event. It's also a really big thing because it's the first time that a lot of young people saw an event like that happen on camera being posted to their social media pages. And I think that goes to talk a lot on the ideas of what kind of content should be filtered from algorithms. I don't feel that any child who has TikTok should have been seeing that on their For You page. That's traumatizing for anyone, the people who were there when it happened, as well as the people who saw it with their own eyes through a screen. So, yeah, that's kind of like what I noticed is there was a lot of political debate, but I think the biggest misconception was the fact that a lot of people were kind of like, why is now the reason that you care about gun violence? Why couldn't it have been whenever children were dying? Why couldn't it have been when Indigenous women were dying? Why couldn't it have been whenever the gay bar in Florida had several casualties? I think that's the biggest misconception we're kind of seeing in this quote unquote debate. I don't really feel like it should be a debate. I think it's just, a matter of are you recognizing the bigger issue? Or are you not?
And that's a fair point because I think too with that comes the actual like mandate or like federal gun laws that control our nation. And quite honestly, federal gun laws are across the board across every state. However, local and state regulations are way different. So like you can't buy a gun, for example, at a Walmart in anywhere in New Jersey, but you might be able to buy a hunting rifle like in a Pennsylvania or another state. I'm just using that as an example. I don't know for sure if that's the case,
Yeah,
but
so
yeah,
that's not really a thing in PA. Because we have dealers that you have to go to, it has to be a licensed dealer. However, if you go down south, pretty much every Walmart you walk into, you can purchase a hunting rifle. Like,
right.
if you've been anywhere south of like Virginia, you
Yeah,
walk into
no,
a
it's
Walmart, you can
definitely
purchase a
the
hunting
same
rifle.
way you could, yeah, the same way you could buy alcohol at any Walmart in Florida, you can probably buy a gun there. So, um, each state and local regulations within those states are very different. And that I think, again, going back to the argument about free, having the right to bear arms, which we'll also talk about in a second. There's a lot I think that has been brought up in this passing of this particular individual. And it's funny because I actually had a civilized, shocking conversation with someone who leans right, who happens to be one of my boyfriend's friends. And he brought up some great points that I think realistically, like, it makes you think like, okay, yeah, I can see why some people are very like protective about their second amendment rights, and one of those are being like, in New Jersey we're always like safe, like if there's were ever an emergency where we would ever have to defend ourselves, we're very lucky and fortunate that in New Jersey you call 911, police is at your house in like 30 seconds. But if you go like Midwest, South, maybe rural America, that's not always the case, and you're gonna have to defend yourself. So
Yep. Yep.
yeah, if you're
Yeah.
being robbed and the robber is holding a gun to your head, you're not gonna hit him with a bat or a knife unless you're very close to him. And the odds of that is that you're going to probably get hurt in the process. So either way, it's just not gonna be a win situation for you. So that was a valid point that I thought. And obviously, some minority, or not some, I should say, most minority populations in America also do not trust law enforcement for historical reasons that we do not need to restate because our history. So that being said, the question is, how can we as a nation who historically has always used their right to bear arms to defend themselves, which was how we literally got out of being ruled by the British. How can we do it in a way that is safe, ethical, and really regulates the use of gun laws?
Yeah. Just to like add to your point about rural America, because I do live in rural America. So I'm in a small town called Phillipsburg in Center County, Pennsylvania, and we don't have local police anymore. We have not had local police in a really long time. The last local cop got fired for questionable acts on duty. That's all I'll leave that at. I'm not going to name drop anyone or slash them through the mud. But we had a police barracks in my town up until I want to say it was 2019. So we don't even have state police that are local anymore. The closest state police are in State College, which is 30 minutes away, which is our county. So technically they're supposed to come from there, or Clearfield, which is a separate county, that's Clearfield County. They have a state police barracks, so they also could come from there. So, just like for an example, my mom had called the non-emergency number to file a report about someone trespassing on our property not that long ago. And she had to wait for the police officer to come to the house, and it was hours. Like it was actual hours. And granted, that was a non-emergency thing. However, 9 times out of 10, the first people at the scene of like a car accident here are not the police. It is your local fire department. They are the first people on the scene because, and they're all volunteers. That's the other crazy thing. No fire departments where I live get paid. However, they get a call and they're all busting out as fast as they can to get there. So it's really a lack of accessibility when it comes to law enforcement in this area. And also, like, I hate to say it, but rural America also tends to not trust police because that's just how people are. They very much so love their country and hate their government. That's just kind of the culture. Unless they're like, culty about politics, which is some of them, but most of them love their country and hate their government.
Exactly. So all that being said, the question which I've already asked, like how can we as a country, regulate gun laws in a way that is effective, still allows our people to have their Second Amendment right, obviously in the way of defense. So here's the federal gun law. So obviously you would need a background check through the federal firearms licensees, and they basically conduct an instant criminal background check and verify the buyer's eligibility. You need to be 18 to buy a long gun, which is a rifle or a shotgun, and 21 to buy a handgun. And then prohibited individuals specifically cannot possess firearms, including convicted felons, fugitives, and unlawful users of controlled substances. And lastly, the National Firearms Act regulates certain firearms, including machine guns, short-barreled rifles, and silencers. So that being said, that's like a very high-level version of what federal gun laws consist of. Elle, do you want to talk about state and local?
Yeah, and I will just like full disclosure before we get into state and local, I have my permit to carry. So just so no one like I'm not trying to play devil's advocate on anything here. I'm just being completely honest. I do have my permit to conceal carry in the state of Pennsylvania. And state and local laws vary vastly because in Pennsylvania, you can have a permit to carry in the rest of the state, but you have to have a separate permit to carry in Philadelphia County because of the crime rates there. So, just to kind of even give you a little bit of a picture of how different it is in one state, it varies so vastly in different places. So, a lot of states have very diverse gun laws. Some are much stricter than the federal requirements. Permits and licensing. Some states require a license or permit to purchase or possess firearms. Concealed and open carry regulations on carrying firearms in public vary, with some states requiring permits or concealed carry and others allowing open carry. So Pennsylvania is an open carry state. However, if you conceal carry, you have to have a permit. Assault weapon bans. Some states and localities have laws restricting or having certain types of semi automatic firearms, often referred to as assault weapons. Registration. A few states require firearms to be registered with law enforcement agencies. The Second Amendment, the US Constitution, Second Amendment guarantees an individual the right to bear arms. The Gun Control Act of 1968, the GCA. This is a primary federal law governing firearms, establishing many of the current regulations and state preemption. In some states, state law prevents local governments from enacting their own gun laws, while in others, local governments can pass stricter regulations. So that's kind of like Philadelphia County in Pennsylvania. So, the Second Amendment is a part of the United States Constitution that protects the right to keep and bear arms, but its interpretation is subject to of ongoing debate within our political sphere. I don't think that's surprising. The text reads, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." While some interpret this as an individual's right for self-defense, others argue it's a collective right related to malicious service. Just like to pause a second and kind of like debrief that, because I know that we had a conversation about this as well, Amaya. The whole reason that that was put in there is because our founding fathers believed that the only way to be able to fight back against a tyrannical government is to have a way to defend yourself. So that's why it's in there. Like, that's kind of like the basis of the thought process of the founding fathers. Now, how that goes into a lot of other things, we can kind of debrief later after we talk about more of the text and kind of the different theories within it.
So, to note, the Second Amendment was ratified on December 15th, 1791, as part of the Bill of Rights, and the language used reflects long-standing historical traditions of the responsibility for citizens to be armed for their country and for self-defense. And if you guys didn't know, I mean, or you should know, almost 250 years ago, we were fighting for our freedom from Britain because we were essentially owned by them, for lack of a better word. And so that's primarily where this comes from. It became a part of the Bill of Rights later on. But my question, as someone who personally believes, and I'm not, and I say this because I have police members in my family who work for the government, who work for local law, and obviously they have permits to use guns and or own guns depending on their specific unit they're a part of. Realistically speaking, again, Ella and I had already had a conversation about this, but why do people need anything bigger than a handgun, a pistol, like just your average handheld gun? Obviously, rifles are used for hunting, but realistically speaking, how frequently do you expect to be self-defending because someone's robbing you, someone's hurting you? Like what do we as a country need AR-15s for, Uzis, I don't know, you name it, those really big ones, those assault weapons. Like what do we need those for as a country? Why do we need anything bigger than a rifle or a handgun?
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the kind of it's like where do we draw the line with the Second Amendment, right? Because obviously back whenever we were declaring independence from Britain, assault rifles didn't exist. They weren't a thing. We're talking about a rifle that you had to ramrod the gunpowder down into back then. Like that's was one of the most common from that time period. We're talking about ones that had bayonets on the end of them. It's not what we have currently today. And that's kind of where I think that a lot of the open interpretation kind of gets lost on a lot of people is what is the purpose of an assault weapon outside of an active war? Like, why does the general public need that? And specifically, because we are talking about the Charlie Kirk case, it's a harder case, right? Because it wasn't an assault rifle that caused that. That's where you kind of are like, okay, well, however, a lot of mass casualty events that we are seeing in schools, in bars, at concerts, things like that, are from assault weapons. And that is kind of where the issue lays. And that's something that I think we really need to just kind of acknowledge as a country is why do we need that? Why do regular police forces need that? It's different if it's a government agency that could be dealing with high profile, extremely armed criminals. There's different agencies that do raids on drug trafficking, on human trafficking, things like that. Okay, they should be well armed. SWAT teams should be well armed because they are going into extremely dangerous situations. However, there's no reason for your local police officer to have an AR-15 when he's out patrolling on highway patrol. And that is a regular thing in some places, which is bizarre. That is my opinion on it. That is how I feel about it. But like, just sit and think about it for a minute and ask yourself why we feel the need to have those things. What is the reason? Because as someone with a permit to carry who fully believes in the right to defend yourself, because I have had people try to come at me crazy before, there's no reason for the general public to have that. It's not necessary. Are you fighting a war in your front yard? No, didn't think so.
Exactly. I rest my case there. So that being said, I think that's a large part of understanding and dissecting what our founding fathers actually meant when we should have the right to bear arms. Obviously, we're not fighting any tyrannical, I probably said that word so wrong, but either way, we're not fighting our government right now. And I don't think we plan as a country to do so unless things go awry. Knock on wood, they don't, but I don't really think as a nation we need large AR-15s, those big assault weapons. So, next, something that's been really big is ICE, also known as Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So, they have been making a lot of headlines lately. The most recent being an ICE officer in New York at a federal courthouse, being caught on video pushing a woman. Long story short, if you didn't see the video, which was kind of graphic, if we're being honest, this woman's husband was arrested. I'm not sure whether he was arrested with a warrant, without one. That wasn't made clear in the video. But what was in the video was the woman visibly upset, asking the ICE agent why her husband got arrested, if she can find out any other information. And she didn't necessarily touch him, but she was very close to him, and I guess, if I understood correctly, he got really fed up and, like, pushed her and very hard in front of her 2 or 3 children, and a lot of people had to intervene, and reports following the video said other ICE agents were very, like, I guess, disturbed because they didn't anticipate that. She wasn't necessarily doing anything wrong, so to have that really adverse reaction was kind of shocking, and then to also get it on video, I think also made matters worse. And then also, there was a recent sniper attack on a Dallas ICE facility where a gunman shot at a van, killing one ICE detainee and injuring 2 others. And then the suspect then shot himself. And similarly, there was another incident involving an ICE officer being fatally shot by a suspect who resisted arrest and killed and dragged the officer with a vehicle in Chicago. And then the other, which kind of has been on the news, but Alligator Alcatraz, quote unquote, and other detention centers, more or less just like the general treatment of the immigrants who are put there and how they're treated, the environment, and those kinds of things.
So, something that has been very big news in my area because I think we discussed this whenever we talked about it, but if we didn't, I'm gonna say it. If we did, here's a refresher. Where I live has one of the largest ice facilities in the country, right in the backyard of the property that I want to build my house on one day. It didn't used to be there. It was a private prison for a very long time. The private prison got shut down because they weren't able to effectively make money with it anymore, which, prison industrial complex, whole other issue. However, Geo Group purchased it, I believe, in 2019, and it's been an ICE facility since. There was a man who allegedly took his own life there back in August, and there is a group in our local area called the Moshannon Free Collective. We are Moshannon area, that's what this is considered here. And Kilmar was just transferred to our facility, away from his lawyers, away from anyone who was closer for contact with him, and right after allegations came out against a pastor of assault sexually and physically on a woman within the last 2 weeks. So they are currently going to be holding a protest. I think it was actually today when we were recording the 29th. Yeah, it was today. They held a protest up there requesting that he be moved. His council requested that he be moved. The fact that he is still going through this battle is absolutely insane. I'm just going to say that personally. I know people that work at that detention center. I know that they don't get the care that they need. I also know that there are people who worked at the private prison when it was there, and they said that the conditions are about the same as what the private prison was. So that says a lot about the general incarceration population in our country, as well as those who are considered to be in detention centers. Yeah. They are currently pushing to get that facility shut down, but I don't foresee it happening because they pay entirely too much money in school taxes to our local district, which is currently in significant debt. Our taxes went up by 4% this year.
Interesting.
But I thought that would be interesting to share on this front because it is quite literally in my backyard, like both figuratively and literally. So there's a lot of news. There's been a lot of protests regarding the detention center. Obviously, I am a chronically ill person. I have not participated in them. However, I do carry zines in my shop that the Shannon Free Collective puts out that talks about things such as this, as well as like the history of Indigenous people in our area and things of that sort. So, if you are wanting to look into it a little bit more, the Shannon Detention Center, located in Phillipsburg, Pennsylvania, definitely do a little digging there.
Yeah. Um, I think generally speaking, the point you made about the prison industrial complex is very interesting because although a lot of TV shows are fictional, I think they do depict a very accurate picture of what life in prison is like, especially in the very, I will admit, very gory shows I like to watch, like Snowfall, Orange is the New Black, and so on, though mostly based out of America. But either way, I think other countries in like Europe specifically, I should add, do a great job of rehabilitation of its prisoners, and not just like the way the best way I could describe American prisons versus somewhere internationally in Europe are very like they're starkly different. The food is different, the lifestyle is different. Obviously in prison you're not going to give your prisoners access to things that probably got them in trouble in the first place, but when you're rehabbing them, when you're teaching them how to live again, how to adapt to life once you're outside the bars, more often than not, I don't think prisoners, unless they're a very repeat offender and have nothing else and that's how they live to do, they're most likely than not going to be rehabbed. And when it comes to immigrants specifically, I just don't understand. And this is me just like just thinking out loud here. Like, why are we treating illegal immigrants? I'm saying illegal because I don't see anyone being illegal on land that was never ours to begin with. Like, sorry, yeah, we were born here, but this isn't really our land. We took it from the Native Americans.
It's my land.
Exactly.
My family came from here, part of it anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I was born here, but like my family's from indigenous island, aka Puerto Rico, so I'm from a different indigenous land. But I say all that to say it's just I don't understand why immigrants are looked at so poorly when this country was built on immigrants.
Well, and that's a whole other discussion that we probably should have at some point, but it's kind of the whole idea of I don't know if you ever went into detail on this in history classes at all. In the 90s, there was kind of a campaign by the political administration referring to people of color, specifically Black Americans, as super predators because of their higher incarceration rates, which is a whole other TED talk of a whole other subject. However, the problem is that whenever you have a government that wants to create more control, I guess is the best way to put it. I'm not going to say a fascist regime specifically. However, if you have a government that is wanting to gain more control, they have to create an enemy that causes fear within their people. And that is what they are doing currently with immigrants. And so many people, because if you go on like Twitter, whenever you see the posts from like news organizations, even like MSNBC or ABC or whoever, like it's not just like right-wing media, but whenever they like post about a story that has to do with ICE, you see all of these people in the comments portion replying to it saying absolutely horrible things about immigrants who they've never encountered in their life, 90% of them. And it's just like you have to create this enemy to be able to get people to trust you to have more control. And I hate to say it, I hate to say it, but if you look at dictatorships specifically, Mussolini is a good example. Hitler is a good example. They all created a major enemy to gain more control over their country. That's the play. That's the whole point behind it. And that is why whenever people are put into detention centers, there is not a due process or justice within that system because they don't believe in that because they're not American citizens. And that is also why you see higher incarceration rates among citizens in this country of people of color because we are still getting those effects of that political agenda in the 90s, creating people of color as the enemy of these super predators who commit all this crime. Yeah. That that is quite literally how you create a dictatorship. And I hate to say that, but that's just the facts. That's how it works.
Whether or not we agree, that is very true. I mean, we didn't learn about it to just like know that knowledge. We learned about it because you don't want history to repeat itself. So we're going to leave it at that and jump into tariffs on pharma. While there are a lot of tariffs on many different things, pharma is obviously very important because we have a large population in our country that rely on medicines for their illnesses, especially if they're chronic, like ourselves.
Just I can't say anything except for just like make faces and being like, yeah, like what is wrong with you people? But okay. You know,
Yeah,
you hate women, you hate immigrants, and you hate disabled people. Got it. We got it. We figured it out. We understand.
yeah,
Thanks.
that is our personal opinion there, by the way.
100% my personal opinion, but as a chronically ill person with many issues, thank you. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah. So President Trump recently announced 100% tariffs on brand drugs. However, there is a caveat in which companies that build a US manufacturing plant will be exempt. So I believe two of the companies in particular, one of them is Eli Lilly, and there was another one that I cannot remember off the top of my head, but these are specific to brand drugs. So here are a few of the sub bullets that we found based on this recent announcement. Only 1 in 10 of prescriptions filled in the US are for brand name drugs, while the vast majority are for generics, which are much cheaper and luckily will not be affected by these tariffs. However, if you're allergic to all generics and can only specifically use a brand name, like myself, you have a problem. So, the other part of this that is an issue is that insurers and the middlemen, mostly known as the pharmacy benefit managers, usually try to negotiate with drug makers or absorb some of these costs. However, it's going to be more likely that they pass it on to payments in the short term, usually in the form of a large copay, which means out of pocket, patients are still going to be paying more. Not only that, patients with private insurances are most likely going to be worried about the price hikes because if you have private insurance, that means you're going to absorb the cost. However, those who get their drugs covered through government health services and programs such as Medicaid and Medicare will also could also see price increases. So that all being said, and again, there are tariffs on other products coming from other places into the US. But of course, people need their drugs so they can be healthy or at the most healthy they can be, not 100%. Because a large amount of pharmaceuticals are produced overseas and usually are coming from companies like Sun Pharmaceuticals or Taro, or I believe actually those are the same. I'm not sure. But a lot of pharmaceuticals are coming from different countries to America. We buy their drugs, and guess what? You're going to be absorbing those costs if you use brand name.
Gonna get a lot harder, especially for people who are on Medicaid, probably more so Medicare than Medicaid, because I feel like, at least in most states, the Medicaid programs are pretty full coverage. However, Medicare, you tend to have out-of-pocket costs with copays. I know a lot of older Americans in my area, including my stepfather, who utilize Medicare, and they already have copays that they have to pay. So it's like one of those things where it's just kind of like, it's only going to make it worse on those people. And 9 times out of 10, those are the people who are on more medications. While there is a chronically ill population of younger people, the vast majority of Americans who are on multiple prescription medications are going to be over the age of 65 and qualify for Medicare. That's just like statistically how that is. So I think that we're going to see a lot of financial burden put onto our senior citizens in this country, which is not what was supposed to happen. However, here we are.
Yep. And this kind of blends into the next part.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about NIH funding cuts. So in May of 2025, the White House proposed reducing the budget of the National Institutes of Health by roughly 40% from about $48 billion to $27 billion. Such a move would return NIH funding to levels last seen in 2007. Since NIH budget records began in 1938, NIH has only one previous double-digit cut, which was a 12% reduction in 1952. Congress is now tasked with finalizing the budget ahead of the new fiscal year, which begins on October 1st. In July, the Senate rejected the White House's proposed cuts and instead advanced a modest increase. And in early September, the House of Representatives also supported a budget that maintains the agency's current funding levels. However, talk of cutting NIH funding is not a new development. Such proposals tend to resurface from time to time, and the ongoing discussion has created uncertainty about the stability of research overall and prompted concern among scientists about the future of their work. Changes in the political climate of the United States are spilling into scientific research, while many past administrations of both parties supported and funded science funding and education. The current administration has enacted cuts to currently funded research upwards of 40%, and proposed budget for the 2026 fiscal year shows a 39.3% cut to NIH funding. While this may not initially be concerning to most people who may ask how this could possibly impact their daily lives, it is a pressing concern when one considers the broader impacts of reduced research funding. The NIH uses priority lists in determining funding status of project applications. Utilizing priority lists allowed the researchers to identify studies that were in the lower 40% of the NIH funding projects based on priority. They dubbed these studies as at-risk projects based on the current and proposed funding cuts. Scientific research is how we quite literally get anything FDA approved. Like, that's something that I don't think a lot of people understand. Like, if it wasn't for scientific research, a COVID vaccine would not have been approved. If it wasn't for scientific research, there would not be 90% of treatments for illnesses that we have. That's just how, a lot of people don't, I think, realize what these organizations do to have a full grasp on what it means to have scientific funding cut.
In my job, I work with a nonprofit organization specific to the neuromuscular community, which is severely still lacking research. This company in particular, helping families with various kinds of neuromuscular diseases to get the funding they need and just kind of making their life overall better. And I think that those with disabilities are always going to be underserved as long as we keep allowing these cuts to happen. No matter what, and this is not just about the neuromuscular community specifically, but more generally speaking, when you're not like helping these people, like, and you're just focusing on, oh, what can we cut to save money, like, you're just going to make matters worse. And I just feel like when you're voting for stuff, and obviously this goes back to voting, and we did a whole episode on this, so if you didn't watch it, you need to go watch it. You need to understand what exactly you're voting for, because in this election in particular, a lot of people lost versus won. If anyone won, it was just the president, even though there's a whole debate about that, but we're not going to get into that. That's a whole other TED talk. But either way, I say all this to say you have to understand what is being cut to really know, like is this the right decision that was made?
Well, and that's a thing too, right? Like, if we're looking at the chronically ill community in our country, which seems to be rising, um, but there's a lot of theories about many things, two of which include POTS and hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which I have both of and have for a while now. I was diagnosed with POTS over a decade ago and HCDS within the last year. But there is no actual medications approved to specifically treat those disorders. It is only medications that treat symptoms that they recommend for those disorders. It is a complete lack of research within those sectors. Same goes for things like PCOS that highly affects a lot of women, specifically younger women of reproductive age, whenever they go to try and have children and find out that they are suffering from infertility from PCOS. Sure, there is IVF now. That's a thing that you can do, but there isn't any way to specifically treat it to try and create a better outcome for the patients. It's just to treat the insulin resistance portion of it or the period inconsistency portion of it, right? There's not medications approved specifically for PCOS. Like, it's not, this is going to treat multiple things within this disorder. And that I think is where we're kind of losing the plot a little bit is like we have so many different disorders that are just not having any funding put towards them. And now we want to cut funding for things like even terminal illnesses. Like, that's bizarre.
Very bizarre. And overall, I think like this, if anything, if we had learned anything in our president's first year, and granted, he's already been president before, but I don't think the changes he made last term were like to a point where it's like, are we in danger? To think, are we in danger as a society? Because the first time around, sure, gas was lower, groceries were cheaper. Again, we were living in COVID, so obviously it was going to rise either way because of supply and demand. But we're at a point right now where people are questioning whether they need to figure out if they can have food this month versus their prescription medication. And that's a problem. Because if you
There's
need,
there's a
yeah,
lot
if
of people participating in illegal activities to be able to pay for their prescription medications.
right, and people are going to be like, oh, well, why can't you just get a job? What do you mean? The job market is literally trash.
There are we are at a point currently where there are less available jobs than there are unemployed people.
And not to mention all the students that literally just graduated and cannot get jobs in their field without having at least 2, 3 years of experience and a master's degree.
Yep. Yep.
And then you wonder why everyone now is deciding to get a master's degree versus getting or starting a job because they can't find jobs in their field. And by the time they do get a job, they'll probably need a PhD at that point.
Yeah, it's it's only getting significantly worse, and something that I like recently started as a shop owner. Every year whenever my shop anniversary is coming up, I do a customer satisfaction survey. And I started to get some response filing in specifically from my live sales survey. I'll be sending the other one out later this week. However, the biggest reason that most people are not purchasing is because of financial budget restraints currently. That is just the facts. And I love my customers, and I will be the first person to say if it comes between buying something for me or paying for something you need, please take care of your needs first. But it also puts a question into the sustainability of my livelihood. And that's another thing that people aren't thinking about is like, yeah, the stock market may be slightly coming back up, but that only helps the mega corporations and millions and billionaires. It doesn't help the small businesses, which America was built on the backs of to get to the point that it is with our industry currently. Just a little food for thought there.
All that being said, because we've been yapping here for a little about an hour now, let's end this by saying we still have a ways to go in this term. And for the sake of this country, I do hope things start to reverse as they were because it was working.
And don't forget to go out and vote in your local elections this November and midterms next November. Because change starts on the local level and it can only grow on the state and federal level if you vote in both elections.
Not only that, your local elections directly affect you, therefore, you do need to vote.
Yes. But I think we should get into a lighter topic. I didn't even ask the question yet, Spirit. Gosh dang. What does the collective need to hear today? For this week. Oh, we have the Queen of Cups. The Queen of Cups. A divine feminine who is very secure in her emotions, who fills her cup and the cups of those around her. Oftentimes seen as a motherly or nurturing figure, kind of like the Empress. The Queen of Cups is very much so about finding your emotional fulfillment and being happy within it within a nurturing role. So whether that is being nurturing towards people that you have close, intimate relationships with, business partnerships with, really a sign of having empathy and understanding, but also not cutting off your own legs to spite yourself, you know? Like, I think the actual saying is cut off your nose to spite your face, but idioms aside, very much so someone who takes care of themselves and makes sure that they're taken care of and their needs, but also is there for others and knows how to show empathy.
Interesting. Good card.
All right, now we will get into the astrology almanac. Today, the Sun in Scorpio will square with Pluto in Aquarius, making you more willing to participate in arguments and cause a scene. This, however, won't make you feel better, so try to keep your cool and remove yourself from situations before you blow up. Then on the 26th, the Moon in Sagittarius will square with Saturn in Pisces, creating a limiting mindset for you. Try to break free from the limits and find creative solutions. On the 27th, teamwork may prove difficult thanks to the moon in Capricorn squaring with Venus in Libra. On the 29th, Mercury will enter fiery Sagittarius. This transit will help you to think big and in expansive waves. Will help you to think big and in expansive ways. Big ideas, big pictures, and new experiences. But don't jump the gun on these ideas as Mercury will be going retrograde soon.
And as you know, do not start anything new during a Mercury retrograde, especially a contract.
So take those ideas, write them down, and
And
then post
hold.
retrograde.
Yeah.
Post retrograde, start working on them.
Yep. Yep.
They're gonna come in. Allow them to come in, write them down, and stick a pin in it for later.
Exactly. Wait till the new year. All that being said, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Sister Sister. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. If you're new here, do also follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And be sure to hit the bell button for when the next episode drops. We love you. Peace out.
Bye, guys.